Passion drives animal advocacy, but sometimes even the best intentions can backfire, leaving us with awkward missteps or real harm to the movements we care about. Welcome to Slightly Tofu, a podcast from China that talks about animal abolitionism and animal rights, incorporating social commentary and ecofeminist insights. And this is our second episode from our special English language series with international guests. In this episode, I sat down with activists I met at the Copenhagen Animal Liberation Conference this year and asked them about their journeys into veganism, their experiences in advocacy, and at heart of it, the mistakes they've made or witnessed along the way. I wanted to do this because so much of our work in China and Asia more broadly borrow from English-speaking countries, yet those strategies don't always translate to our own contexts. So learning from what's gone wrong elsewhere can probably help us avoid repeating the same missteps and find approaches that work better here. The conference itself was very eye-opening for me, a buzzing crowd of activists from around the world, swapping stories and strategies that went far beyond just go vegan. Two themes kept surfacing: decolonization, challenging the idea that Western models can be copy-pasted everywhere, and total liberation, the belief that animal and human freedom are inseparable. And just as these ideas were being debated, Gary Uvalsky reappeared online, reigniting an old fault line in the movement. Should advocacy stay animal first, shutting out everything else, or must it be intersectional to be ethical and effective? So our first guest, who's chosen to remain anonymous, talks about a pattern she's seen across the movement, how good intentions from international organizations can sometimes miss the mark when they reach Asia. She's an animal justice advocate whose work is grounded in local culture and shaped by an intersectional perspective, giving her a sharp eye for how global activism translates or doesn't across borders.
There are several big organizations and groups within the animal advocacy movement that have been trying to expand their work and branching out to other global majority countries, especially to Asian countries. And to me, as an Asian animal advocate, I can say that that is not always a good thing. So I observe two big issues about that. First of all, whenever an international organization wants to start working in Asia, it's usually an organization that well established in the West. They usually work for several years in the Western countries and have their programs or projects up and running, and they are quite confident with the programs, and they know that this program can create an impact for farmed animals. So what they usually do when they start working in Asian countries is that they copy the program that worked well in the Western countries and then paste it in Asia. And you can see why that is a problem, right? Because they fail to take into account the culture differences, politics, social issues surrounding the programs, and lifestyle of the people. These are all different. Like the context plays a major role into whether or not the solution that you want to implement to improve the life of farmed animals will work out. And not only did it not work out, it also caused more harm for the local movement as well. An example that I can give is when these programs executed by foreigners who have failed to be culturally sensitive when they talk about animal justice and veganism. Of course, the local population, the audience in the local countries would feel resistance to the idea and have a wrong, negative understanding of animal justice and veganism. And I see that a lot in my home country as well. And that is very sad because it takes years back of local advocates' effort in trying to raise awareness, implementing educational programs to make people care about animal justice, to make people understand veganism in our own culturally sensitive way. The second problems that come with international organizations coming to work in Asia is that I noticed that most often than not, these organizations have a top-down corporate-like structure. So that means people who are hired in the higher up position who can make strategic decisions are people from the West, who of course have no knowledge about the context and about the culture in Asia. Although I know many organizations that try to hire local staffs as much as possible, they are being hired just people who execute the project and not someone who can have a say or dictate the direction of the programs. And that's a problem because when they replicate their programs and there are contexts or different realities that simply don't allow the programs to work out, local staffs are the people who know that, who see the problems, but when they bring this up to their higher-ups, they are not listened to. And these local staff still are expected to deliver the same impact, the same numbers as they hope to see, because they know that in Western countries they manage to get this high number, right? So these local staff, from people that I know, sometimes get burned out and even drop out from the movement because they are not listened to and they are pressured to create an impact that they know is impossible to create. And that creates a major problem for our overall movement because the movement in Asia is known that we are lack of resources and also lack of trained advocates who can do the work, who can engage in activism to help farmed animals. So when these international organizations come in and cause burnout and eventually drop out from the local advocates, we now have even less people who want to involve in the movement. And that's the two major problems. And I think it's important for every international organization who want to start working in Asian countries to carefully assess their impacts and the harms that they might create to the local movement. So first of all, they need to ask themselves that to see if there are any local groups working in the same issue or not. Second of all, they need to be aware that whatever works in one country doesn't always work in another country. Third, they need to ask themselves what kind of impact they would create if they start working in Asian countries. Is it just going to be a short-term impact that if they have the money to pump into their programs and then they can create certain numbers, but whenever they need to stop operating, those numbers, those impact also disappear? Or would it be something that can create even long-term change for the movement and local movements, local advocates can continue to use and build upon that even after they need to stop operating in those countries? And most importantly, they need to understand if they're going to cause more harm than good to the animals and to the local movement. I think it's their responsibility to ask themselves these questions before starting to work in Asian countries or other countries in the world too. And I think we need to work a lot more on dismantle the power structure that is oppressive, whether it's white privilege, whether it's capitalism within the animal advocacy organizations, and especially white saviorism. Even though you mean well, even though you want to help farmed animals, I think it's really important to come back and really understand the context and admit that your well intention could also play out in a wrong way. I think it's an illusion to think that we can achieve animal liberation without caring about other social justice issues, and vice versa. If you are an animal advocate, you will come to notice that many obstacles that you encounter in your activism come from the fact that there are different oppressions that existing in a human society. Animal justice issues don't exist in a vacuum. It exists because of our relationships with non-human animals. It exists because we treat them as objects, we feel okay exploiting from them, we see them inferior. And this whole idea of supremacy is the same logic that is applied and used anywhere when injustice happens. It's used to justify discrimination within human groups as well. So when you see this core belief, you see the pattern of injustice. And you see that injustice is everywhere, it's just connected. And that's why I believe in the phrase that say, none of us are free until all of us are. And that's why even though I am an animal advocate and I center my work around non-human animals, but I make sure whenever I can to use intersectional approach, which means I try to see a bigger picture of total liberation, try to see that the issues that I'm working with are intersect, and how can I approach it in a way that I can address multiple problems at the same time while having non-human animals at the center of my activism. I don't think it's a difficult thing to do. It's simply just the reality that we are handling it. So I think it's important for activists from any backgrounds with any focus to realize that human rights activists also should realize that their agenda and their goal will not be met if animals are still being oppressed. And I think it's important to see the bigger picture. And another thing is that I think it's really important to understand a very different nature of the environment that we are working in. So for example, animal advocates from the West might have a total different reality from advocates that are working in Asian countries. In the West, let's say, usually they are more democratic, they are more stable politically and economically, and let's say, like for example, they have certain level of human rights already being met. But many countries in Asia that I have known and talked to other Asian advocates, some of them have to work in a society that still are very against LGBT rights or women's rights. And if there are women advocates who are trying to organize events to raise awareness for animal justice, they are usually being targeted by a misogynist group, for example, and that's really put them in danger. Or in another country where justice system is being used by farm animals companies to sue workers and press when they are being exposed about their wrongdoings. Basically, they not only abuse the animals, but they also violate immigrants' workers' rights. And all of this just put more layers into understanding the obstacles of the reality that we are working in, even though we are advocating for the animals. But still, it will not be possible if human rights still an issue and really put advocates in danger from day to day. So yeah, I think it's important to have that awareness in mind. Maybe you might, even though you cannot see it in your activism yet, but it's also good to have it in your mind to understand really different realities of other advocates that working in different conditions.
Before we move on to our next guest, a quick heads up to our listeners. The following conversations were recorded outdoors, so you might hear a bit of wind, chatter, or nature doing its thing. I tried to clean it up as much as I could, but if it still sounds weird, I kindly ask for your forgiveness. or at least your lowered expectations. We're about to hear from Fernando, a longtime animal advocate who got his start in Colombia's anti-bullfighting movement way back in the 90s. Fernando co-founded Colombia's first ethical veganism group and currently focuses on activism that is at the intersection between human conflict and animal rights. He has some incredibly wise stories about the art of showing up for people, giving them space, and not comparing their national traumas to the plight of farmed animals. It's a fantastic look at how sometimes the best way to win people over is just be a normal, supportive human.
So one mistake we made pretty early on was we tried to co-opt other causes. So when we started doing animal activism in Colombia, kidnapping was very popular. Like they were kidnapping people. Like armed groups were kidnapping people. And I remember we tried to put an ad on a newspaper that has a picture of, there was two versions. One had a picture of a hen, another one had a picture of a cow. And it says like, these are people, animals are kidnapped in farms, which was a way to tell people like, if you care about kidnapping humans, then you should care about animals. But that didn't work. As a matter of fact, the newspaper rejected our ad and it never got published. But that was a mistake we made, trying to co-opt other causes.
And maybe just to elaborate a little bit, what went wrong exactly with that kind of language or with that kind of co-opting?
Yeah, so what went wrong was that first I think it was disrespectful to the people who were suffering because their family members were being kidnapped or they have been victims themselves. So there was a lot of pushback from using that kind of language. And then even if those people had been open to the idea of like veganism, now they have a really negative view of vegans. So they stopped to consider it because their interaction with vegans is this very sensitive type of person.
Right.
Yeah.
But then if we cannot use this language because we thought people can sympathize, what kind of other languages, what kind of resources are available to us?
Like for me, I think it's like you need to show up for them. And eventually some of them will start showing up for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you're the complete opposite of the Gary Uvalsky's.
yeah, I'm like show like true solidarity. Like show these people you care that their issues are important, that their suffering is important, and it will not be everybody, but some of them will start asking you, oh, why do you do about what's the issues with animals, and then you start talking to them, and some people come back and they actually understand what you're talking about, and they join you in your struggle or in the animal struggle, and you do that by showing up for them.
Do you have maybe one example?
Yeah, I had one of my best friends was that he grew up in my neighborhood. I told him when I went vegan, I told him I had gone vegan, and his first reaction was very negative. He told me, I remember he told me right away, he told me never talk to me about this. I don't care. And I could have been more aggressive with him, right? And it would have never changed his mind. But I said, okay, I won't mention it. And then he, like a few months later, he came back and asked me, why is it that you don't eat meat? Like, and I told him, I showed him, and I showed him some literature, and I gave him a book to read. And then he said, I'll tell him. I didn't even give him a speech. I just said, like, just read these things.
But I'm curious, at the very beginning, like, why did he have such a strong attitude towards it?
Oh, I don't know. I think he thought I was going to be judgmental of him.
Right.
And I think he was surprised that I wasn't. I think he was surprised that I gave him space for him to come back around. So I gave him that space, and then he took my literature, and I remember about a week later, he told me, oh, that was great. Thanks for sharing that with me. And then he went vegan, and then he showed it to his mom, and his mom went vegan. And then he showed it to his nephew went vegan. So just by giving one person enough space to come back to you instead of being pushy.
And actually, sometimes I feel, because you're also from the global south, right? If I can put that generally, sometimes I feel a bit envious with regards to, or actually the infights in the Western vegan discourse, because this is very weird to say, but it actually shows they have a plurality of thoughts, and you actually have people at different spectrum in terms of how to approach animal rights, and at least they all come from the same position, which is to defend animals. Of course, people have very different, ideology and very different approaches, but at least their voices are diverse enough for you to actually have an infight. Are there such a kind of disagreements within the vegan movement in Colombia, or?
There were, yeah. Because there were people who wanted, and there still are. For example, Anonymous for the Voices has a chapter in Colombia, which makes, for me, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you have a society in which people with masks have done a whole lot of harm. Like, there is no positive association with being masked. People think something's going to happen.
So, could you tell me a bit more, like the mask? Well, why is there so much negative kind of, or
because all these
association,
like the death squads I was talking about, they show up as masked men with guns, and every time you would see somebody masked, like, you knew something was going to happen, something bad was going to happen. So I think as a society, that doesn't work.
Even with the the V for Vendetta, that even with that mask, shit like that is a bad association.
I think people just think something bad is going to happen. So they tend to be very wary of what are these people about, what's going to happen right now.
Right.
Instead of being curious, they're not curious.
But with the Cube of Truth approach itself, like exposing animal agriculture, do you think there's anything counterproductive about it?
I think there is something very counterproductive about it, is that they tend to not talk about the human issues which affect a lot of people in Colombia.
Right.
So it's the people who do this type of work in Colombia, like Cube of Truth, tend to be very privileged.
Okay.
So they don't understand. It's this very Americanized or Westernized version of veganism, in which all you have to do is go to the grocery store and buy new stuff, and a lot of people in Colombia cannot even go to the grocery store to begin with. So it's like, how do you convince them that this is a problem? So it doesn't work. It just falls. Like, people are worried about way too many other things.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, so the way is to show them that you care about those issues too, and then tell them, they'll actually pull your information. That's my experience. At some point, people get curious about, like, why is it that you do this?
Right. But then, are there even any positive, like, example, more international groups and more institutional groups coming to Colombia? And
Well, yes. I think there was an organization that was started in Spain. It's called Anima Naturalis, and Anima Naturalis went to Colombia and created like a chapter. And what helped was that they had a lot more resources than groups like mine. But at the same time, they let the group have a lot of autonomy. So the group in Colombia, it could use those resources in a way that made a lot more sense for, like, Colombian society. And so they were pretty successful. I think it's one of the most successful groups in Colombia because they were allowed to do that. So I think it's very counterproductive when groups like AV go into another country and they don't provide resources. I mean, they provide resources, but they also dictate how you should be doing activism, even if it doesn't make any sense. They're like, this is the way you need to do it. So the locals always know better. Local people always know what's the best thing, what works and what doesn't work.
When you're talking about local people always know, I kind of want to push you a little bit. Well, local people always know how to do these kind of animal advocacy or have an idea about what works and what doesn't. Like speaking from experience, I think at a very early stage when you're an animal rights advocate, you tend to go to these larger organizations like PETA, for example, and because they already have institutionalized like structure, they have like a roadmap, right? They have all these things already established.
Right.
So sometimes it feels like a no-brainer to go for these resources.
Yeah.
But you don't think that is the way to go. Have to be very reflective and reflexive about this.
Not if it's not allowed to be localized. And I have a perfect example of that. Is when I first started and I didn't know anybody else doing this. I remember I wrote to PETA and they sent me leaflets in Spanish. And I thought, oh great, I have leaflets in Spanish. And I started giving them out to people. And one person, I guess, read it and came back and said, this is very sad, but this doesn't happen here. And it occurred to me, like, okay, well, he has a point. I'm giving him a leaflet that has statistics and pictures of farms in the United States.
Right.
It was meant for United States people who spoke Spanish, not for us. And I thought, okay, that's a problem. So what should or could have happened that would have been better was like if I asked PETA, hey, I want to print my own leaflets. And they came back and said, okay, we can help you with that, with the resources to do that. And then I can put my own information that makes sense for where I am.
Right.
And very few groups, I think over time, have done that. The only one that comes to mind is Vegan Outreach, has a Vegan Outreach in Mexico. And they allow the Mexican group to be like, okay, so these leaflets have statistics and pictures and they're put together by the group in Mexico. So that's more of a show of solidarity than anything else, which is I'm giving you resources and let you decide how they are used instead of I give you resources and I also tell you how to use them. Yeah.
Okay, I have one final question.
Okay.
How does conservation fit into all this?
Oh, yeah. Like for me, at least in Colombia, there's obviously deforestation and what that implies, right? Like when we cut down the forest, right, you're not killing just the trees. It's like, who lives in the forest? Where do they go, right?
Yeah.
And we cut down forests to make room for animal agriculture, right? So it's a very intertwined, is linked, right?
It's a direct link.
Yeah, direct link.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating for me that conservationists don't see that. So a lot of some conservationists in Colombia, they are more like, let's protect what's left, instead of like, instead of asking like, hey, what happened to the forest? Like, it's more like, let's protect the forest that's left. And that's important. I'm not saying that's not important, but that's important. But they need to go a step further and say, okay, these are the drivers of this deforestation. And some organizations around the world mention it, but at the same time, not a lot of them mention like veganism as an option as a solution.
Well, because lots of conservationists also eat meat.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm like, I don't understand. You
Lots of environmentalists are meat eaters. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and a lot of conservationists, I find frustrating is that they talk a lot about like justice for the environment.
Yeah.
But I'm always like, how can you advocate for justice for the environment without advocating justice for animals? It's like the animals are part of the environment, right?
Yeah.
So why don't they say anything about this? So it's very frustrating. I think they need to expand their worldview a little bit.
I can share that frustration because I work in the environmental humanities and practically like all the people that I'm dealing with are the environmental scholars and again, I'm generalizing. I would say most of them don't care about animals at all. They try to challenge the human exceptionalism, challenge human supremacy. But then when they see nature, they see trees, they see water, they see rivers. They don't see what's inside the river, what's on the tree. And yeah, it's hard. And when it comes to climate as well, all they have this tunnel vision of carbon. Like everything is just carbon, right?
Yeah. I can see that. Yeah, and I don't know. I think one way to try to fix that is, for example, if you are in that space, just showing your own consistency.
Yeah.
And maybe somebody will come back around and ask you like, hey, what about cows and pigs?
Yeah.
And then they'll put it together. But it can be very frustrating because we want it to be done quickly, right? Yeah. One thing I showed in my presentation was like how I went to my first anti-bullfighting protest in 1999. So I had to wait 25 years.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to just put in the work. Like it's not gonna be a month, but you just keep doing and keep doing and keep doing. And sometimes it works. Yeah.
Yeah, if you can give people like a crash course, what are the major landmark event that causes bullfighting to kind of being prohibited?
Oh yeah.
Most landmark success or
So yeah, I think that was asked. So there was a few things. One was the in the capital where the biggest bullfights happened. They passed an ordinance that made the bullfight very not profitable. So first they banned any out. So they said you could have bullfights as long as there's no instruments that like hurt animals. So like if you want to hit an animal with a stick, it cannot be sharp. Things like that.
yeah.
And then they were taxing them really high, and it became to a point that they were like, "There's no point in running a bullfight. We're not gonna make any money." So that's really when the ball started like rolling, because it got to a point where even though a bullfight was not banned, there were no bullfights. They were not interested. They were having them in other places, a lot smaller, because that's how they could make it profitable. And I think another landmark was that was political. Like the president that got elected had promised he would ban it, and so people got into high gear and they started working really hard for that. That's another landmark. And I think the forming of a coalition, even if it's just for a single issue, when it's that close to have like some really lasting or like tangible results, I think it's strategically it made sense. They put all like their differences away and they said, okay, let's get this law passed, and then it will be, and that work. And all that has inspired, that process has inspired the anti-bullfighting campaigns in other places, like in Mexico. They're really looking at like what happened in Colombia. Let's do the same thing and see if we can get it done.
One piece of puzzle for me was the cultural part. I don't know how much is related to Colombians' cultural identity or tradition, because when it's starting to fade away, people just accept that. I mean, how do the people feel, like culturally speaking?
So there's two things there. One is traditionally, bullfighting has been like a rich people thing.
Okay.
Right? So not a whole lot of the population goes to a bullfight or can afford to go to a bullfight, but it's like the elite, you know. Like I remember going to protest bullfights, and we saw like TV celebrities and politicians going in. It wasn't, I mean, there was regular people, but let's be honest, like poor people are not going to a bullfight, right? So there was not a lot of like real cultural, it wasn't that culturally strong for us. Nobody saw it that way. So that I think that helped to
Okay.
help with them.
There's not like that much toxic masculinity associated with
No, there is.
was.
There is, but and I think if bullfights had historically been like cheap and a lot of people could go, there would be a lot more resistance to banning.
Right.
As a matter of fact, there's another type of animal spectacle.
Cockfight.
No, it's called corraleja, which is like it's almost like a bullfight, but I mean I don't even know what it is. They basically just there's like an arena and they throw one or multiple bulls in the arena, and people, the public, just goes into the arena to like harass these animals, and the whole point is like the animals like chase people for like fun. So that has met with a lot of resistance to be banned because that's more culturally meaningful to people in certain regions because it's affordable. Like people go there. I don't know why anybody would pay to get hurt by a bull,
Exactly.
but they do that, and it's lots of people. So yeah, in Colombia it helped that it was seen as this like very rich people thing, and so there was never like it wasn't too popular, to be honest. And then the newer generations were like not interested. So over time, the last times there were boom fights in Colombia, in Bogota, like you could see it was like half of it was empty. People didn't want to go see that. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Thank you, Fernando.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for your insight. I think it's fascinating, especially, and thanks again. Our next guest is Charles. He's an advocate who brings a fascinating perspective to our conversation. Charles has a foot in two worlds. He's of Asian ethnicity and has lots of insights into animal issues in the global south, but is also on the front lines of the movement in the UK. He's here to talk about his journey, which started with some very personal, very vivid childhood memories of animals in the Philippines that he tried to forget for years.
I feel like I've dipped into as many facets of vegan outreach as I have in London and the UK. So that a lot of local ones, a lot of international ones. Anonymous with a Voiceless are an international, probably the most well-known and well-funded activist organization, I think. And then but then I would say there's also even more organizations who were born out of frustrations with Anonymous with Voiceless. So there's a lot of, in Germany as well, AV, Anonymous with Voice, are considered relatively quite strict and dogmatic in their approach. They have a whole script that they like people to adhere to. They believe it's the most effective and efficient way at guiding the conversations with the average people whilst you're doing outreach. It is useful, but as with most organizations, there are things that are lines in the sand, red lines, red flags for some people. In Germany, there were some of the major AV groups. They allowed people who are known to be fascists to be there because it's for the animals. You know, It's not about politics. There are their stances, no politics, but for a lot of people, it's reprehensible and impossible to conceive being with fascists openly.
And this could be counterintuitive for a lot of people, because how can you be a fascist but at the same time having compassion for animals?
Well, as someone explained to me, because I was talking to them when I was in Germany doing some outreach there, they said that Nazis in Mein Kampf, he says that Jews are below animals. So there lies their justification for it, which is like just bonkers, really.
Humans.
Right, so there's all sorts of things wrong with that, but so I've done that. In the UK, there's lots of different types of outreach. I've tried to do a lot of it. They've all got different approaches, but the thing I do primarily now is because it's easy. When we come to places like this, there's a real sense of solidarity and optimism that can almost pervade you inside, to think that, we can do things and change things. but sometimes the sheer statistics
Yeah.
and the reality of how many societies really are. I went to Dubai, and it was a microcosm of many other places in Asia, of how heavy the meat
You kind of said that you
was on the menus everywhere.
Yeah,
And you think that it really makes you comprehend your own individual action and agency in much smaller terms. So I found that one thing that feels tangible is helping sanctuaries. So I fundraise for them by I've got a background in cooking at some restaurants, so I go to festivals and things, and the profits I make I give to a variety of sanctuaries. So there's a tangible thing there that I can feel that I can connect. There's plenty of us within here.
Yeah.
I've tried to think of how can I contribute.
And if I may ask, like, kind of go back a little bit further to the history of your vegan or animal rights journey. Do you still remember the very first kind of encounter you had with animals, and also just like the moment that makes you feel like you're compelled to do activism?
Yeah, I think that my vegan origin story was actually when I was 8 years old.
Oh,
I was in the Philippines. But this is my vegan origin, and then I forgot it, and then I came back to it. My family in the Philippines live in poor rural part in the south, on a farm, and my mum, we were going to have one of the chickens from the back, and my mum brought it in, broke the neck, started bleeding, cut the neck, and I went into the other room to start praying for it. My mum was shaking me, saying, "What are you doing? Why? It's just a chicken." And I was crying, and I still went and prayed. And then a couple of years later in Nigeria, there was in the back garden of a friend's house, there was a cow being, there was some sort of celebration, and there were ropes attached to each of the cow's legs, and people gathered around it. And I stood 2-3 meters from the cow's face, and I could recognize terror in the voice, fear. I don't help in not human language, but I understood perfectly.
Yeah.
And then I cut the throat and I watched the blood drain from the cow. But again, that lingered in me, but stays behind, right?
yeah.
And then I remember I was about 8 years ago. I had KFC for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and I realized I felt like shit.
Yeah.
And I thought, what am I doing? I was a professional, well, kind of no longer, but I was a kind of semi-professional athlete at the time.
And you were eating at KFC.
Yeah.
3 times a day as a
Well, it just kind of ended up like that. Like
Right.
I woke up late, and so I had lunch, and then I was like still hungry. So then I had an early kind of middle of the day. And then I went for dinner. It was like a funny thing, but it really made me realize that there was an element of like, this is impressive to other my guy friends. There was some layers as to the bullshit as to why I did that. But I realized like I felt inflamed. To be honest, it came from a health perspective. It's the truth.
Yeah.
But I knew in the background,
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to deal with that whole conversation about rights and welfareism and morality and ethics. I'm going to make it about health. That's tangible. Plus, everyone else around reacts more positive. You're doing it for health? Yeah, great. Oh, fantastic. How do you feel? It was great. I was like, oh no, I'm doing it for the animals. Like, do you know how unhealthy that is? That's terrible. Are you sure? Like it's
The cognitive dissonance.
right.
Yeah.
So it was an easier thing socially
Yeah.
to be accepted if you talked about it in health. I have a keen knowledge for biohacking and biology and health and nutrition. So it was like an easy fit. But then it was here,
Oh, really?
Copenhagen.
Really?
About 8 years ago, I came with my ex at the time. I was on the edge of being vegan, but really vegetarian. And then we couldn't find anything that was vegan for like dinner. It was bizarre. We couldn't find it where we were. And we ended up in this place. And the closest thing they had was eggs Florentine on salmon. And it's on a hollandaise sauce, which is it's an egg-rich egg cream sauce. And it just clicked that I felt I conceived what I was having as being menstrual waste. I was having, a period, whatever, the feeling, sensation of disgust kind of, because you're looking about, like, it's almost like it's been pulled. You have this image, oh, this is delicious. And then you're like, oh, hang on, that's what it is. And then you kind of realize this is kind of gross. And then it's a very quick movement from there, I would say, to recognizing more. I had it come to me.
Right.
So it was there, and I put it in my mouth, and it just kind of, it was so rich.
Right.
It's so eggy. I just kind of gagged, and I couldn't finish it.
This is fascinating because for a lot of people, they might just actually feel, wow, this is really rich and I love it.
Yeah, right. But me previously, that's
Right.
why I couldn't make the move. That's why it was easy to dismiss. The dissonance was easy because you could justify it because of taste. But when taste is removed, it's a completely different
Yeah.
conversation. But it's a
Yeah.
difficult thing to try and do that with people that you talk to. Try and convince them through words.
Yeah.
Because then the conversation is, in fact, doing any type of outreach, you never really want to talk about fucking food anyway, because it's irrelevant. It's a consequence of your ethical position, not the reason for it. But
And you have traveled so many places, right? And how does that play into your understanding about, how veganism can work or animal rights discourse can work out in different culture? Because I think you probably have different kind of like Asian perspective and also maybe in Africa and also very Eurocentric.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think it really makes me acknowledge how much internalized chatter that we have, which can be interpreted really because of cultural programming as internalized self-hate and hatred and embarrassment and shame, that you're not like, because even though, you might be fixed in a position, you can still hear the voices of, say, family members or the societies which you're in saying, why are you doing this? The lack of acceptance.
Yeah.
I internalize a lot of that because you still want to participate in the world, but then suddenly, and this is probably the difficulty, none of us wants to feel rejected by the world we live in. But choosing this position, you essentially have to reject a lot of it, but still maintain and be inside it. So I think the interesting thing has been trying to navigate the different responses and tailor your opinions to them. If I know someone, they just want to talk about the food, or they're like, oh, I hear you're still vegan. It's like, yeah, and it's not really a conversation. They're not really open to it. Like, yeah, I just love eating grass. You turn a joke into it, you dismiss it. I just want to move on, because you know that you're now cognitively trying to avoid conflict or conversations.
Right.
Not every moment you learn is a moment to have teaching points or learning points for everyone around you.
So
No longer am I the savior. I can only lead with myself as my moral example.
Yeah. So when it comes to the mistakes, this is the main reason why I want to interview you, and also many other advocates here, is like, if you could go back in time, what are sort of the mistakes that you wish you could avoid?
Well, funny enough, so this is why I think it's complicated, because we have people like Gary Orosky who can get in the bin.
Exactly.
They can go here and just jump in there. But if I had seen more slaughterhouse footage, if I'd seen harder images earlier, I would have gone vegan earlier. That's the truth. The misnomer with that is the suggestion that the more people you show slaughterhouse footage to, the more people will change.
Yeah.
But I'm a big Jake Conroy fan, and I have been for a long time. So the message that he talks about being that the only change we'll get will be a systemic one, I acknowledge. Do I do outreach? Yeah, I still do. Do I overestimate my personal agency and its effects on the movement as a bigger picture? Not anymore. Am I like the man who stood in front of the White House with a candle during the Vietnam War, and he was asked by reporters, why do you do that? And he said, was not essentially, and not that he thought that he himself could make a change, but he did it with solidarity with his own humanity. And I do the same thing. I do it to honor my ethics, that I believe is important. We cannot always choose to think that each one of our actions will be significant. If you do, it can be very easy to get depressed. Yeah, so I feel that actually coming to places like this, going to outreach, often it is about solidarity with ideas.
Yeah. But what do you say about, say, for example, after the talk from Jake, and I thinking about the mistakes that he had mentioned, right?
Yeah.
But then I start to think about the unintended consequences of these radical movements, right? Or these radical pressure campaigns, especially in the digital age where people decontextualize. I guess the most common counter argument for these kind of campaigns is that it backfire. People end up become even more defensive about what they do. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think context matters probably in that. I think it's a nuanced argument. I'd say it depends on which is a pressure campaign, which is the culturally insensitive or component that isn't working. I think there's a lot of reasons why a lot of the messaging fails in a lot of vegan movements.
Right.
But it, as kind of suggested by Jake there, it's who's behind a lot of it. So I don't agree with much of it, but the essence of what it is to be vegan, I try to do something about that.
Yeah.
No. Do you have a specific, when you asked that question, was there something specifically in your mind that you were thinking of?
I'm thinking about how social media tell only half of the story,
Yes.
and especially with, I don't know what will happen with AI, and people can manipulate information and use different framing, provoke and incite people to make us look bad. The whole kind of defensiveness would come from, the general public seeing these pressure campaign. Maybe a good reaction, relatively good reaction would be all about the people working at these companies. Like you have to have solutions for farmers to transition, etc. This is already a kind of a good reaction, but then you also have maybe really bad reaction where people will say, these are, terrorists, these are already extremists. At least I think in Asia, when we don't have that history of doing these kind of sabotage or these kind of pressure campaign that much.
Yeah. I
I
do
don't
think
know if you ever thought about
you in
these-
particular are super interesting for me and for a lot of people here because the Chinese culture is so old and established, but it in many ways it mirrors America's obsession with dominance and power and status and you said saving face.
Yeah.
So how things appear.
Yeah.
Rightness, wrongness, pride. These are things that are problematic when you are asking people to confront things that can induce shame.
Yeah.
So there's a whole layer there that is a cultural obstacle to trying to have an ethical conversation and that they have never really contemplated as a society, in my opinion. I think there are always pockets within most societies where there are people who maybe don't eat much meat, the Okinawan diet, lots of fish, whatever, primarily vegetables, blue zone, blah, blah, blah. But I think that China, and I've said this for a long time, represents, it is a different hurdle. Here we live in a Western bubble and our pressure campaigns, our small wins, if we only need to just zoom out and compare the statistics with the size and scale of what's in China, and we could be instantly deflated. And I think that there is the essence of thinking about our own personal agency and what is the impact we want to have. Sometimes we cannot know that, but being as smart as you are, you will be navigating towards what can you do and where can you start. I think the podcast is fantastic. I think it is the best way to, if people listen, to engage people's thinking. There's a reason why everyone's got a podcast. There's a reason, because people would much rather conversationally absorb something than read through and try and then personally reflect and allow that marination to happen, in a lot of academic circles. So I think it's a great medium again. I can't remember his name, but he was talking about using pop culture.
No, Christopher Sebastian.
Yes.
Yeah.
As a means to get cut right through and across as many different barriers. I think that will be
one way out, perhaps, in China.
Yeah. How do you?
Except we also censor fiction as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's super fascinating.
The stories we've heard so far from Aim, Fernando, and Charles have given us an invaluable look at the complexities of animal advocacy on a global scale. They've highlighted the critical need for cultural sensitivity, the dangers of a one-size-fits-all approach, and the deeply personal journeys that shape our activism. Now we're going to shift our focus. We're moving from these vital discussions about cultural translation to the front lines of direct action in Europe. Here, in countries with long-established animal rights movement, the challenges and the mistakes can be quite different. The fight often involves direct pressure campaigns, navigating complex legal systems, and sometimes direct confrontation with authorities. The risks can be higher, and the strategies are forged in a very different kind of fire.